I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. And this is the I Hate Politics candidate interview with Brooke Lierman for Maryland Comptroller. If we hate politics, what about politicians? Bring up Congressman Jamie Raskin in southern Montgomery County, and you will see that we only hate politicians we don't agree with. Andy Harris, for example, the Congress member from Maryland's District 1, who saw little wrong with the January 6th insurrection. He is now being challenged by Democrat Heather Mazear. But let us not forget that a plurality of people in District 1 voted him into office. How do supporters of Jamie Raskin and Andy Harris live together in the same state or even the same country? That is the challenge politics is supposed to solve, no less. I'm Sunil Dasgupta, host of I Hate Politics podcast. Rather than your usual candidate forums with 20 questions covering the range of issues and limiting candidates to soundbite answers, the I Hate Politics candidate interview is an in-depth discussion about one issue that the candidate has chosen. If they didn't choose, I chose for them the issue where I thought they were strongest.
With too many Zooms, and at first I thought I'll make some bread, but instead I am stuck in my head.
My conversation with Brooke Lierman explored the possibilities of the office of the Maryland Comptroller for which she is running. A run for the office of Maryland Comptroller is widely seen as a stepping stone to a run for governor. And so I thought it was doubly important to ask her about her plans for the Comptroller's office. Lierman is a delegate in Maryland General Assembly representing District 46 in Baltimore City. But she grew up in Montgomery County and is a daughter of Terry Lierman, a former chair of the Maryland Democratic Party and one-time Chief of Staff to Maryland Congressmember Steny Hoyer. Music for this episode comes from Karol Levchenko, an Arlington singer-songwriter who is the choir director at Centerville High School in Fairfax County, Virginia.
Everything feels wrong, but I know it will be okay. Just maybe not today. It'll be okay one day.
Brooke Lierman, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you so much for having me, Sunil. Really appreciate it. Great to be here.
All right, let's start at the basic question. What does the Maryland Comptroller do?
I like to think of the Comptroller as the elected Chief Financial Officer of the state of Maryland, right? It's the elected CFO, but it has a huge breadth of responsibility. I like to break it down in three ways for people to understand. First, the Maryland State Comptroller is one of only three independently elected statewide officials in Maryland. So we have the governor who oversees our agencies. We have our great attorney general, Brian Frosh, right, who represents us in court. And then we have the state comptroller. And that office sees every dollar in and every dollar out. But it has this important statewide bully pulpit as well to make sure that we're talking about and really focusing on the income-based issues of the day. And so I'm really excited to have that statewide perspective to talk about, the big economic challenges the state of Maryland faces, tackling the racial wealth divide, confronting climate change, ensuring our bond rating stays AAA so we can continue to, to borrow money at a low rate. So big issues, education, how we're funding our schools, big issues that we have to tackle. The second thing is that, of course, I'm always sorry to let people know that I am running to be the next state tax collector. Or if you're lucky, maybe the state tax refunder. And of course, the General Assembly in Maryland sets all our tax policy, but the state comptroller is responsible for administering all our tax laws and, making sure that we are lowering costs of tax compliance, making it easier to pay taxes, modernizing our tax administration system, ensuring that we're doing a fair and equitable collection of taxes, that people are paying their fair share, but no more than their fair share. That's something that I'm excited to undertake and work on. And then third, the state comptroller is a member of many important state boards. Two that I think are always worth mentioning are the State Retirement and Pension Board and the Board of Public Works, right? So the State Retirement and Pension Board is responsible for overseeing the pension benefits and investments for our 415,000 state retirees. Now, I actually chair the Oversight Committee on Pensions in the House of Delegates right now, and I've been on that committee for 7 years now. And so I have a very good understanding of, how our pension system is working, what's not, and what I'd like to see changed. Just one small example of something that I'd like to work on if I were on the actual board would be to lower the fees that we're paying to investment managers. We hire a slew of investment managers to do our investing. That's not something we should be doing anymore. We have been working on bringing some of those investment decisions in-house, but we have to have investment managers who are in-house, so we're not paying fees, and who reflect the diversity of the state, right? So that's just one issue. So we can maximize our returns and make sure that our money is working well for us in Maryland. Two, of course, the Board of Public Works, right? So as last but never least, right? The most important administrative body in the state of Maryland. And for those folks who don't know, the Board of Public Works in Maryland is a really unique institution in almost all of American state governments. We're one of the only ones that has one, and it is responsible for overseeing and approving nearly all state expenditures, capital expenditures. So it's anything that's $200,000 or up, basically, which in today's ends up being almost everything, right? That state government is funding. And the Board of Public Works is made up of three individuals: the governor, the treasurer, and the comptroller. And if you think about it, the comptroller is sort of supposed to be the people's advocate, right? So I'm excited to be the people's advocate on that board. The treasurer is appointed by the General Assembly, so reports to the General Assembly. The governor, reports to the agencies, basically, like all the agencies that are bringing these expenditures, bringing these capital requests, were appointed by the governor. And so really the independent voice on the Board of Public Works to represent the people and our communities and our small businesses is the comptroller's office. And I just think there's so much that we can do with the Board of Public Works to make sure that we're using the power of the purse to really build generational wealth in Maryland, make sure that we're creating jobs in Maryland, and that we're thinking big about how our money is working for us. So that, in a couple of minutes, is the comptroller.
All right, thank you. That's a great base on which to have this conversation.
Yeah.
So let's begin backwards. The Board of Public Works.
Yes.
Specifically, right? I understand that the comptroller has this independence, and the governor is much more sort of leading agencies, and the treasurer is reporting to the assembly. And so what specifically can the comptroller do in that 1 in 3 context to change the things that you were talking about, which is maybe, pick any project?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So to understand the Board of Public Works, the Board of Public Works is not only responsible for approving contracts, but also for writing our procurement regulations. So in many ways, it's a policymaking body. And there's only 3 members. And so having even just one being one of those 3 votes is incredibly important, right?
Sure. Who writes the actual procurement language? Is it your office, the comptroller's office, or is it the governor's office? Or does it come from the agency? Where does it
comes from the agency, and then the Board of Public Works works through that, and then it actually goes through the AELR committee, which is a committee I serve on, the Administration, Executive, and Legislative Review Committee, that reviews all regulations. We have very little power to change regulations. We can only sort of hold them and review them, but they at least come through our committee. But the agencies write the procurement regs, but the BPW is very much responsible for overseeing the procurement regulations, and so has a really important role to play in making sure that we can make those procurement regulations work better for the state of Maryland and for companies in Maryland, frankly, too.
So give me an example of where you would change the procurement regulations or
Sure.
language to make it better?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So one of the things that I've seen throughout my time, I'm an attorney, I'm a civil rights and disability rights attorney, and I represent a number of blind-owned businesses all over the United States. And I have done procurement work on behalf of those blind-owned businesses around the country. And one of the things that I've seen government agencies do time and time again is, the blind-owned business will be a business in the state owned by a person with a disability, hiring other people with disabilities, perhaps, and, hiring locally. The wealth is there in the state. There's a huge company that'll come in, like a Cisco or, whoever comes in, and they underbid, in response to an RFP, they will underbid the blind-owned business, maybe not by a lot, but by some. And then what happens is the government awards to the lowest bidder. And that then huge corporation will file change order after change order after change order throughout the life of the contract, which means that not only are taxpayers not supporting the local business and building wealth there, but they're also ending up paying more money over the life of the contract because that huge company just doesn't really care about its reputation and isn't concerned.
Are you going to give more points to a Maryland company over a company that works in multiple states? And is that
difficult? No, it's difficult to do that because of Commerce Clause issues and because then other states will, work against us. So what you do is you just look at what is the best value. You don't say I'm awarding.
But how do you do that is my question.
Yep. So you look at where the money is going, how it's staying here, who's going to be working in the community more. We have some contracts that already do that in Maryland.
It seems to be difficult, right, legally to, as you said, because of Commerce Clause, to say, oh, we will favor Maryland companies in some way that then, says that, we national companies are going to not have, are going to be second place as a consequence of that, right? That's going to be very hard to pull through in any court. So there's
actually a lot of states that are able to work to make sure that they're working with their companies. DC has a great system. I'd be happy to send you the information about it. There are other states that do a better job of making sure that they are valuing companies within their territory, not because they're, not by always, out and out awarding points, but by looking at the value of the contract, which means how much of the money for that contract will stay in the state. And so I think, there's a number of ways to do this, and other states, including the District of Columbia, already do this. Another thing that I'd like to focus on is to make sure that we're really not waiving our MBE requirements, right? Making sure that Black-owned, immigrant-owned, women-owned businesses, that we are building those businesses up and making sure that we're creating a pipeline of those businesses so that that our agencies aren't sort of waiving the requirements that we have in place already, right? And so that's an important issue too.
Are we waiving indeed a lot of MBE requirements right now?
We are waiving requirements sometimes.
Do you have a sense of how much that is?
I wouldn't feel comfortable giving you a percentage, but I would say it's not uncommon.
And very typically, these are large contracts or small contracts. Any kind of descriptor that you have with that? Because, that's a very serious thing.
It is a serious thing. And I think, part of it, and it's not just at the level of the Board of Public Works, right? There's a whole nother level of government purchasing that we need to look at, which is the purchasing that happens below the level of Board of Public Works purchasing. If you are you're an agency, you're the Department of Natural Resources, right? You have somebody who has your credit card, the credit card for DNR, right? There's purchasers, and those purchasers are able to, they are doing work with smaller businesses to purchase, to make a number of purchases. So tens of millions of taxpayer dollars are spent on smaller purchases by Maryland employees with purchasing powers on state issued credit cards. I want to ensure that there's more transparency, what the number of purchases, how much is being spent at that level, where it's being spent, the businesses that are on the lists, right, to use that. I want to make sure that there are programs to educate small businesses and potential vendors on how they can market to those purchasers within each agency to encourage purchases in our local economies, right? So I think it's really important that, all Maryland businesses have a fair shot at state contracts, and that we encourage contracting with local vendors, small businesses, Black-owned businesses, and immigrant-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. So, I want to make sure that we're really modernizing contracting terms and conditions, improving procurement forecasting to give companies more time to prepare bids, right? Improve quick pay solutions, and also sometimes unbundling some of the larger projects to provide more opportunities for small and mid-sized businesses to secure state contracts. So I just think there's a number of things that I'm excited to learn more about and to work on in terms of procurement.
And the comptroller has the ability, the legal authority to get into those kinds of matters?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the Board of Public Works. Yep. That's all part of the Board of Public Works. Yep.
But the Board of Public Works only deals with contracts above 200,000, as you explained, right? So contractor, I beg your pardon, the comptroller independently has a charge that says you can look at the procurement systems of different agencies below 200,000?
So the comptroller, like I said, is the elected chief financial officer. So the comptroller, part of its job is being a watchdog, right? Making sure that we're spending our dollars in a way that most benefits state taxpayers. And so having a good understanding and doing a review of how those taxpayer dollars are being spent, doing the audits that we need to do is, squarely within the ambit of the comptroller's office.
Okay, great. So let me ask you about the other board that you mentioned.
Yes,
the Retirement and Pension Board, right?
Yeah.
So you want to reduce the fees that investment managers get and diversify investment managers. So I understand market pricing a little bit. And one of the things about, investment fees is that you pay a higher fee for better managers. Is that not true?
I don't think that's true.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't think that's true. You pay a higher fee for a bigger name, right? Maybe you pay a higher fee for somebody who has an address on Wall Street versus on Main Street. But I don't think that there's a necessary correlation. But I do think one of the things that I do know is that we in Maryland, we passed a bill a few years ago to bring more of our investment decisions in-house. And I was on the committee when we passed that, because we've started recognizing when you're a smaller pension fund, you might contract out for investment managers because you don't have the ability in-house to do it. But we're growing, right? We're pretty big at this point. And so it's just important that we start bringing more of that decision-making and that those investment decisions in-house. One of the reasons that we need to do that too, and there's is a few years ago, we passed a bill that actually allowed the state to overfund our pension. So, we have to put in a certain amount through our general fund every year to keep it actuarially funded, right? Mm-hmm. So we now, if there's extra money at the end of every year, we have something called a sweeper provision, mm-hmm. where we take extra money that isn't being spent and we sweep it into the pension fund. And that money is supposed to be invested in a fund in local Maryland businesses. That is not happening. And if other states, at least 12 other states, that run the range of politics from Indiana to California, right, are really focused on starting to invest their pension dollars locally. Because not only do they get good returns, right? You have to be a good fiduciary. This is not about sort of, blindly investing, right? This is good opportunities to invest in your state, in Maryland-owned businesses, to free up capital to do more work. So if we even took just 1% of the state retirement and pension fund, that would be $500 million that we could invest locally in businesses to help create jobs, to help create more capital to for entrepreneurs, which frankly is one of Maryland's big problems. We have less ready capital for entrepreneurs and startups than many of our competitor states. And so sometimes, even though Hopkins gets more federal dollars, than any other private entity in the country, and there are spinoffs and companies, and they're working hard to keep them here, at the end of the day, if they can't raise the money through angel investors or state support or private dollars in Maryland, but hey, look, Massachusetts is offering them free lab space and, $20 million investment, like they got to go to Massachusetts, and they're going, right? Like we need to keep those companies here.
Right. And so you said there's a law in place that is supposed to do that, and it's not happening right now. So I have a question. Question, right? When this kind of law is not followed, what recourse is there?
It's a good question. So the recourse is really with the executive branch, right? And with the agency that is supposed to be in for doing that law. But the bottom line is, and I think we've seen this in other circumstances too, perhaps in DC, is that the executive branch has a lot of power. And so we can pass laws in the General Assembly, but it's challenging for us to enforce them if the agency doesn't want to. So a good example of this would be we have very strong clean water and clean air laws on the books in Maryland that were passed decades ago, right? Like I can't take credit for them. But MDE, every year of the Hogan administration has brought fewer and fewer enforcement actions of our clean water and clean air laws than the year before, to the point where we are now, like, discount the pandemic year. The year before that had the lowest level of enforcement of our clean water and clean air laws on record in the history of Maryland since they've been passed. So it's very challenging to make them do their jobs, right? I will say on the Appropriations Committee, we started having them report this. So I was on Appropriations overseeing the agency. So we made them start reporting quarterly what enforcement they were doing, hoping that some transparency would make them do more. Then we sectioned off their money and we said, you can only spend this money if you're spending it on enforcement. They just chose not to spend the money, right? I mean, so there's only so much as a legislator that you can do. You can't force people to do their jobs.
Okay, so if you were running for governor, I would say you could solve this, but
right, I'm not. Yeah, that was just an example.
As comptroller, what can you do about this?
So one of the things that I think is really important about the comptroller's office is its ability to audit. And to bring auditors in and to make sure that our money is being spent wisely and well. And to make sure that we're reducing, not just that people auditing to make sure that people are paying their taxes correctly, like the wealthiest income holder, the biggest corporations, that requires a robust auditing staff and smart tax attorneys. We need to hire more of them. Frankly, we've lost some over the years, just like every other agency has lost staff. But we also need to make sure that we're auditing and working with the Office of Legislative Audits, that we are working on auditing our government programs to bring light to what's happening and what's not. So although, my office might not necessarily focus on MDE's enforcement, it would focus on making sure that our money is being spent, understanding where our money is being spent, understanding who's paying their taxes, if they're not, why not, and what we're doing about that. Looking at how we can help small businesses, if there are challenges that small businesses, I know there are challenges that small businesses have with complying with our tax laws, because they change every year, right? And so it's hard to keep up. One of the things that we should be doing is we should have a private letter ruling process. What is that?
Can you explain?
I will. Almost every other state in the country has a system where if you are a company or a family, and the laws change, and they change every year, basically, you can apply to the comptroller's office and get a private letter ruling, which is just a written statement issued to a taxpayer that interprets and applies the tax laws to that taxpayer's represented situation. And when they get that, they can then rely on that interpretation of the tax law to pay their taxes. So they have some certainty that they're not going to be sort of sued for more taxes, right?
I get it.
Yeah. So it lowers the cost of compliance for businesses. It makes it clearer so everybody understands what the tax laws are, and it helps people pay. But right now, we don't do that in Maryland, and we should.
All right. So this brings us to the modernization of the tax system that you had said earlier. How would you modernize the tax system?
Sure. It's a great question. So one of the things that Peter Franchot and his team have been working really hard on is bringing in a system called Compass. And Compass is, to provide sort of a user-friendly system to give a single view of the taxpayer. And it's more of a, it's an online system for, I would say, more of the back end of the comptroller's office. All taxes and fees would be administered with a streamlined processing. It would be sort of one-stop self-service portal, and it will replace our legacy tax processing systems. That's really important. It's going to go into place like over the next year. And then it will give us a place that we can build from. So once that Compass system is in place, we then want to build a front end system for users. So if you are I Hate Politics podcast and you incorporate as a business and you're like, I'm going to start, I'm a business, I'm going to start selling stuff and making money because everyone wants to listen to me. How do I do that? Well, there's a one-stop shop, right? You go online, there's one-stop shop for small businesses. You can look up, you should be able to look up, here's the paperwork I need to file, here's how I file it. I don't need to download it, right? And then file it out and sign something and print it. It's something I can just do online, get it all done, hit submit, right? And then to pay your taxes, you have a username, an ID and password. You can log in, you get all your information in there, you pay it, you hit submit. Oh, you were fined for something by accident. You can see the fine in the same place, the same username and password, right? This is how our banks exist, right? This is how everything exists right now. And we don't have that at the state level, but we should. We should have one-stop shopping for businesses to be able to pay their taxes easily and quickly online.
So, as it turns out, I have done all of those things.
Oh, you have? Oh, cool. Okay.
Not for the podcast, but I set up a nonprofit.
Okay.
And I went through the process, and it was a little cumbersome, but not very different from what you're telling me, because the MD Business Express does, in fact, provide.
Yeah, no, MD Business Express is great. And so it should be incorporated all into the comptroller stuff, and MD Business Express all needs to be incorporated together.
So they're in different agencies now? Okay. All right. So look, there is so much to learn from me.
And I will say, I have a lot to learn still too. Anybody running for a new office has things to learn. And that's what's so exciting about this job is I've had the ability over the past 7 years as a legislator to learn so much about the comptroller's office. But now I'm sort of out on the road, running a 24 county campaign, learning about challenges, hearing ideas. I was talking to a woman who owns a brewery the other day, and she was saying it takes her 15 minutes to pay her excise taxes every year or every month for the federal government. And it takes her 2 hours to pay them for the state because the form is so cumbersome. And I was like, that's crazy. Like we can fix that. Let's make that better. So I'm just really excited to keep learning and to keep working with people who have great ideas and can think big about how we can solve some of the larger challenges, but also just how we can make things easier for Maryland families and businesses.
So in order to do this, you need the support of the legislature, particularly in giving them money. If you're going to redo the back end, which is probably a large information technology project now, right? We are going to be dependent on companies like Cisco, which we ding for no reason.
We have lots of good in-state tech companies. We don't have to go to Cisco.
Okay. And by the way, I should mention Cisco is just an example. We're not Cisco.
Yeah, we're not trashing Cisco.
Yeah. That's
too much.
You mentioned fair share of taxes, right? How do you think we are not doing that currently? Why is our tax system unfair today? Tax policy questions are really at the bailiwick of the General Assembly.
So, I think that's something that we do need to examine.
What would you suggest to them?
One of the things that the comptroller can do is really use the data of the office to explain and to demonstrate more who's paying what, who's not paying, where the bulk of our money is coming from. And actually, I passed a bill last year to strengthen our Bureau of Revenue Estimates, which is part of the comptroller's office. And that bureau, and the comptroller sits on the board of revenue estimates, that Bureau of Revenue Estimates really hasn't had sort of the transparency that it needs to make sure that people can get the reporting they need. So we passed a bill, Delegate Corman and I, and Senator McCrae, to sort of open up the process of how the Bureau of Revenue Estimates, estimates where taxes are coming from, require additional reporting so we can see and understand better where our taxes are coming from, who's paying them. For instance, people always ask me, is the casino money actually going to education, right? Or how are we going to pay for the blueprint? Well, we can get all of that data, right? And we should be reporting it proactively. Like, people shouldn't have to ask for it. So the Bureau of Revenue Estimates is now going to have their own website, and they're going to be reporting all of that data annually, how much money is coming in for those. So I think we need to be able to take those funds, take that information and go to the Ways and Means Committee and go to the Budget and Taxation Committee and say, look, we really need to focus on making sure that we are not hurting people at the lower end of the spectrum or middle income. We need to look at, things like, personal property taxes for businesses, which seem, sort of outrageous or, difficult. There's other, I think there are other ideas that the data show, things like combined reporting, right? That we should be looking into. So I think there are ideas that people have been floating for a while, but the data that the comptroller's office brings will be really helpful in sort of charting a path. But finally, I would also just say, I'm really excited to work with my General Assembly colleagues. I think that there's a lot of opportunities for partnership with the General Assembly and the comptroller's office, talking about how we can use the data from the comptroller's office to work with local governments, right? To work with the General Assembly to help inform decisions and ideas, to help inform policy. I was talking to a local mayor, a few months ago, and he noted gosh, I don't even know, I can't even get a list of all the businesses in my jurisdiction. And I was like, that's crazy. The comptroller's office can get you that data, So I think there's opportunities for partnership. If we all of a sudden see all the tax returns for sales tax receipts plummeting in a certain neighborhood or jurisdiction, and we should be able to use that data and go to the mayor and go to the county council and say, hey, something's happening here. You guys really need to check this out. There should be ongoing conversations. Revenue estimates. Our local governments totally rely on the comptroller's office for accurate revenue estimates. We have to get them those accurately early so that they can formulate their budget. So I'm excited to build on the work that the current comptroller has done, but also reimagine how we can use the resources of the office to partner with local governments and the General Assembly.
That would be really cool, by the way, getting mayors information about plummeting sales taxes.
Yeah.
I have a very sort of a wonky question about commercial property tax, right? Maryland assesses commercial property tax based on income. Income produces a net present value and all of that, I understand.
Yes.
But one is based on income and the other is based on property value. And you can imagine in Montgomery County what happens as a consequence of that. That right. If there's a building that, a real estate property owner can leave something empty and go, oh, I didn't get any income, so reduce my assessment. And how do we fix that?
Well, in Maryland, there's a tax on business-owned personal property, and that's imposed and collected by local governments, right? And the responsibility for assessment of all personal property throughout Maryland sort of rests with SSTAT. But it's an interesting question. It's something that the Ways and Means Committee should really, we could look into, frankly, because it is different here than many other places. So, yeah. You also mentioned Montgomery County. I went to I graduated from Walt Whitman High School. My family grew up in Bethesda, or I grew up in Bethesda, and I'm really excited to be able to work. So, although I represent Baltimore City now, which is my adopted home, and I love it so much, I'm excited to be able to work with counties all over the state, including Montgomery County, to really re-envision how the comptroller's office can help provide data to the county council members, to our municipal governments, to help them. I mean, Montgomery County, like, every county in the state, faces unique challenges. And then many of the states face challenges that are shared, housing costs rising, creating multimodal transportation systems to benefit our workers and benefit families and seniors. Looking at, I think housing and small businesses, they are going to be just paramount over the next 10 years, that we make sure that we are building more homeowners. We have stagnating home ownership rates for folks under 35 in Montgomery County, as well as for Black Marylanders around the state. And that's a real problem, because in America, historically, how we build wealth is through home ownership. It's also through owning a business, right? And so if the comptroller's office is focused on helping build more financial resiliency, I want to be bringing together experts and local government officials to talk about, what are we going to do to help reverse these trends? How can we bring people together I'm not going to claim that I have all the ideas or the right answers, but I think an important role of the comptroller's office in building financial resiliency is bringing people together to talk about these big issues and concerns, so that we can have solutions that may come through the comptroller's office, that may go through the General Assembly, that may go through local governments, but so there is more planning and coordinating to be done.
So, I've been watching the housing situation for a bunch of years now in Montgomery County and more generally in the region. And, it is clear that one of the big issues is the constraints of single family zoning.
Right.
And of course, that's a local issue over which the comptroller has no. But you grew up in Bethesda, and, you are a Montgomery County person at heart, at least, I believe.
Don't say that to Baltimore.
I don't want to.
I love them both.
Of course. But where are you politically on this?
I don't know where I am politically on it, but personally, I'm very concerned that if we don't sort of start rethinking our zoning laws, we are pricing out our teachers, we're pricing out our seniors, we're pricing out our firefighters, and we're going to make it impossible to live, affordably in Maryland. I could not afford the home that I grew up in right now. And so, I think we have to really look at our zoning laws and make some big changes. I also think we have to do more to build TOD, right?
What is TOD, please?
Sorry, transit-oriented development.
So why is that not happening? Everybody recognizes that that's what should be done, but why is it that not happening? What is your analysis?
I cannot claim to understand Montgomery County planning better than you, Sunil, who are in it deeply. So I'm not gonna say why I don't think it's happening, but I will say that the state needs to work with the federal government to leverage funding for economic development around metro stations, around Purple Line stations. The state could also provide funding to leverage and incent federal funding for economic development along any public transit route, right? I'd love to see more BRT. I think that these are things that we have punted on for the past 7 years, and we need to get serious. And I think if we do not elect leaders in 2022 who are ready to have serious conversations about how to ensure that families who have fallen behind and are continuing to fall behind, how we can't help make sure they're being lifted up too, we are not going to be in a good place in 15 years.
As the member of the Board of Public Works, right, the big decision that is going to have to be taken, hopefully it'll be taken before you are in office, but Purple Line, right? And how to restart it, and our experience with public-private partnerships around there. What is your thoughts about public-private partnerships and the role that they play? Can they be done at all? It seems like it's very hard.
Look, I think P3s are, what a P3 is means something different to almost everybody you talk to, right? First of all. And I think P3s have their place. I'm really excited to see what happens in Prince George's County with the P3 plan that they have for rebuilding schools, for instance. They're doing a lot of groundbreakings, and there's going to be a lot of new schools going up. And so, getting money and projects deployed quickly through a P3 plan, I think it's exciting. And I, salute County Executive Alsobrooks. I'm excited to see how it goes. But I think one of the things that we learned from the Purple Line is that these really long-term projects that have the potential for cost overruns or lawsuits or challenges, P3s may not be the best model. There's a reason that for the past, the history of the country and the world, public funds have been used to build public infrastructure. And so for these long-term projects, I really question whether working with an Australian company that is like looking out for its bottom line is the right decision versus floating the bonds, using our bonding ability and putting our money in the places where it needs to go over the long term. Because at the end of the day, taxpayers are going to be paying for this. It's not like we're getting free money, right? We are the backstop. And so it's important that we have robust analyses on what it would cost for the public versus what something costs for private. And so I have supported Delegate Solomon's bill the past couple of years to add additional layers of analysis to major P3 projects that are over $500 million. And we've passed it through the House for the past 2 years. I'm hopeful that the Senate will pass it at some point as well. But I do think that's important.
Do you have a very important project in your list that needs to be done? That is BPW, Board of Public Works project.
One?
One or two. You pick the number.
I mean, we need to rebuild all the state office buildings in Baltimore, which were supposed to be done a decade ago and have sat vacant and bedbug infected. And it's a disgrace to our state employees that they have to work in those facilities. It, stops any development potential in West Baltimore. And they're a huge eyesore in the middle of the city. And Hogan has, for the past 7 years, basically punted on the decision of what to do to rebuild our state office buildings. I think transit. I would love to see MTA. It has just recently completed a regional transit plan for the state of Maryland, and we've got to start building that out. The other thing I'd love to see is the MARC, the Penn line, the Brunswick line. We've got to redo the BNP tunnel so that we can, and then we've got to think big, like Virginia's thinking, on how to work with CSX to get additional rail capacity so that we can run trains up and down to Frederick to DC, Frederick through Montgomery County over all day long, right? And the Penn line all day long. Including direct nonstop service on a few lines. So I think that, the transit projects over the next decade are going to be of the utmost importance to helping our economy, towards reducing air pollution, and towards just making Maryland a better place to live.
Well, on that note, Brooke Lierman, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics.
Thank you, Sunil.
That was Brooke Lierman for Maryland Comptroller. You will find more about her at brookelearman.com. You can follow her on Twitter at Brooke E. Lierman. If you are unsure about the spelling of her name, check out the podcast Twitter feed at IHP Pod. Music for this episode comes from Arlington singer-songwriter Kara Levchenko, who is a choir director at Centerville High School in Fairfax County, Virginia.
Bring it in a bucket, Sylvie. Bring it in a bucket now. Bring it in a bucket, Sylvie.